Guys, what's going on? So, I just found out in class, actually, I was in class on Monday, November 12th, 2018, and I was in class trying to learn stuff, and all of a sudden I saw something on my phone, like an alert, for Time Magazine, apparently, reporting that Stan Lee, the one of the pillars of comic books, died at the age of 95. And I've seen like other people come out and say like how big Stan Lee changed the comic book industry and all that, and you know, given the full history of Stan Lee even. But I figured I might as well tell you guys my life with Stan Lee, I guess. Like how Stan Lee shaped me over the course of my life. Now, I wasn't always a big, huge comic book fan. I recently got into it like during my teen years and stuff. And when I heard the news, it like crushed me. Like, even though he was like 95 years old, it crushed me because he was always he was like the icon, It's like whoever what like DC, there's like hundreds upon thousands of creators and all that. Like, Bill Finger and Bob Kane created Batman, and other people created Superman, and like the Professor Marston, the Wonder Woman, or something like that. He created Wonder Woman. All these people created all these different types of characters. And Stan Lee was the one that created at least 90% of all the comics in Marvel, And I'll get into more of that later, but I had to really think about when I first heard of Stan Lee. And I think it was one of two things. It was either Spider-Man, like when he was saving the woman in the first Spider-Man movie from 2002. However, I think it might have been the Princess Diaries 2 cameo, and he was just like this clueless, bumbling aristocrat type of guy. And I was like, oh my god. And looking back at it, I was like, oh my gosh, that was Stan Lee. I mean, what the heck? It was just dumbfounding. Like, after I saw like all these Marvel movies and all that, like Stan Lee was in Princess Diaries 2, and like I had no idea that he was in Princess Diaries 2. So I think I came about knowing who Stan Lee was through documentaries, I guess. Like, I've seen him pop up, but I didn't really know like who he was. I thought he was just like some random character or whatever. Like, why would they put this guy in here? And then all of a sudden, like documentaries and stuff like that with Marvel and whatever, I was like, oh, that's Stan Lee. And of course, not knowing who big huge comic book fans, like not in that realm, kind of like Stan Lee who, It's like, no, it's Stan Lee. There's a Big Bang Theory episode about it. It's like, it's Stan Lee, not Stanley. Stan Lee, which is hilarious. But anyway, so I went about with that. As I found out more about him, I was like, this is sounding a lot like me. He sounds a lot like the average person, because he went through struggle and pain, man. I mean, he's gone through like a ton of stuff he didn't want to do, like struggles in his life. people stealing from him, people like criticizing him for like weird stuff. I mean, it's all around craziness, and yet he's stuck through it. And you know, even though it kind of got a little weird in his later years, and I'll get more into that later, naturally, but as it got more weird in later years, he was still the centered, like, guy you would go up to and just have a conversation with. He's like the grandfather of comic books, you know? It's like, with all these people, he's the one guy you can sit down with and be like, have a conversation. Even though he's like this big, huge type of guy, I've heard stories about like, he's actually very down to earth and very well-centered type of guy. And he wasn't in every Marvel movie. Like, he was, for me at least, as soon as I found out who he was, one of the highlights for movies now was the Stan Lee cameo. And he wasn't in every single one of them. He was not in a few X-Men cameos. Like, he wasn't in a lot of X-Men type of movies. Like Days of Future Past he wasn't in. And I don't think he was in First Class either. But he was in most of the comic book, like, Marvel movies. He was even in Hulk, like the 2003 version. And it's just, even though those movies suck, you know, it's like, he was in there, and he was showing his support, even though the company was a little bit rocky back then. And yeah, he was just an all-around fantastic comic book legend. And towards his later years, I guess, like, I've heard stories about like this, he had to have like these big tough guys to stand around him, because I guess he was fragile, I guess. And he's very old, he has to do more things, like to slow things down. People are like always trying to get at him or whatever. He has to have these big strong guys. People may say that's douchey. I can understand where that's coming from, because he's old, he's more fragile, you know? He's still a centered guy, but he's just, you know, he's got to have these people to protect him because everyone wants to talk to him. So, but yeah, Stan Lee will be missed. I wish I could have met him. There's people online that are like, oh, I got to meet Stan Lee, I got to get a signed autograph from him, I got all this stuff. I never ever had that chance. I knew he was coming close because he was getting older and older and older, and I was like, oh, I need to go see Stan Lee. I need to go see him, but now I'll never get to. And that torments me now. Like, my heart is broken because I can never meet Stan Lee. And it's just heart-wrenching. He seemed like a very decent, well-rounded guy, and I can never meet him anymore. I can't meet him. It sucks, honestly, because people, like, one of the most inspirational stories I've ever heard is the one where he created the Fantastic Four. And yeah, was in the golden age of comic books or whatever, like in the 30s and 40s and what have you. But it wasn't until like 1963 when he was just not having it anymore. He was going through a ton of crap. He was going through, like, he's being pushed and shoved. The censor bureau just decided no more superheroes and all that. The Flash kind of started coming up, and superheroes started coming back up, and he's just like, but with Marvel, it was just sci-fi or horror type of things where no blood is shown, no superhero fantasy elements and all that. He's just like, he's talked to his wife, and he's like, I don't want to do this anymore. But his wife was like, just do one comic book. where you do whatever you want, and if you still don't like it, quit. But just go out on a high note. So he wrote the Fantastic Four #1, and it swept the shelves, man. It was like the biggest best-selling comic book of that time frame, I guess, like the best-selling comic book in like the first weeks and like weeks on end, because it was like a family, and it wasn't just like superheroes. He brought it down to human elements. It's not like the Flash with all this great awesomeness and like sci-fi. He's like running all over the place. He's got a life, but he's the Flash. He's like, it's not like Superman where he's just like flying and saving everybody. He's like, yeah, I'm Superman. They bickered. Like the Fantastic Four bickered while they were fighting, and it was like they bickered, they loved each other, they hated each other. They were like a family. And they were a family. They were the most human superheroes of that age. And after that, Stan Lee just started just sprouting out with stuff like Spider-Man and all that. That's another fantastic story with how he created Spider-Man. He just did all this stuff. And without him, the whole world would have looked different. Like, movies would be, like, completely different. Everyone's just talking about the movies nowadays, but, like, comic books would look especially different, It would be like these gods and these monsters, It's like, whatever. They wouldn't be human. They wouldn't be as relatable to us if it wasn't for Stan Lee. And sure, he's got like a little bit of more controversies and all that, but Stan Lee just changed the comic book industry and pretty much changed the movie industry forever. So, unfortunately, I will never get to meet him. So all I'll have is just the memory of what Stan Lee has done for me, which is create outstanding comic books that I read all the time now. From Princess Diaries 2 onward, like in every single MCU movie, he's been in every single one. Without him, without the Stan Lee cameo, it's gonna be different. It's just gonna suck, honestly. We were like, how can you have a Marvel movie without a Stan Lee cameo, How can you have a sundae without whipped cream and cherry, Stan Lee was the whipped cream and cherry on every Marvel movie. And we're gonna have to figure out how to live without him now. So, here's to you, Stan Lee. Excelsior.